This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
Today on CityCast Pittsburgh, for years and years now, there's been a Juneteenth celebration in Pittsburgh, marking the date when the last enslaved people in this country finally learned that they were free. But this year, the city is also holding its own event. City Council is expected to cast another vote today toward funding both celebrations. We're with a reporter who's been following the whole back and forth. It's Wednesday, June 5th. I'm Megan Harris, and here's what Pittsburgh's talking about. Julia Felton is a City Hall reporter for Trib Live. Welcome to CityCast Pittsburgh.
Thanks so much for having me this morning.
Yeah, I feel like I've been reading your work forever. There has been so much back and forth about Juneteenth this year, who's throwing the celebration, where it's going to be. And now it looks like we're going to have two. Tell us who the players are here, the two companies or major entities involved.
Absolutely. So on the one hand, we have B. Marshall, who is doing business through the Poise Foundation for his Juneteenth event. This is the Juneteenth event that most people are familiar with, right? He's been doing this for more than a decade, most recently at Point State Park. So on the one hand, we have that kind of legacy event that's existed for years. And then we have a new Juneteenth event that will be launching for the first time this year, a city-sponsored Juneteenth event. And that is being done by Bounce Marketing and Events, headed by Fantasy Zellers. They've done the mayor's inauguration and some other high-profile national events over the years, but never a Juneteenth in Pittsburgh before.
Yeah, I mean, and B. Marshall's event, his Juneteenth, has been endorsed, sponsored by the city for many, many years now. Why is the city getting into the game now? Do we know?
So the mayor's administration is saying that, they want to have an event that is sponsored by city funds, that has the city's backing for things like, the city will be paying in-kind costs for things like policing and whatnot for their own events. What the administration is saying is that they want to make sure that this is something that endures. So it's not left to one private event organizer to always be putting together Juneteenth, but it's something that the city has a budget for and a process for. And so it would be something that exists for years into the future. So the thought process, I guess, is to kind of formalize the celebration, if you will, as something that the city can get behind.
Yeah, I saw the city send out a press release comparing it to the 4th of July, which I think is cool, but also very lofty to do. I think that press release came out about a month ago. So just it's such a tight turnaround for something like this.
It really is. We are anticipating that Fantasy Zellers and Bounce probably gets their contract late last week or this week, just depending on that turnaround time. But council voted on that last week. So really short turnaround for her. And then council comes out and says that they also plan to give money to B. Marshall's event this year separately. And he's set to get that money just a matter of days before his event, if the city can even turn around a contract, that quickly. I mean, it might be literally just a day or two before his event starts that he gets that funding. So it's a really tight timetable this year.
Well, let's talk about the money itself. It's a lot of money for a major event. How are they dictating those amounts? How much is it? And who's getting what?
So last year, the mayor's administration said that they were going to give up to $250,000 to B. Marshall's event for up to 2 years. So city council approved that legislation, but then when the contract went through, they only signed a contract for 1 year and $125,000.
I heard about the first half of that. I did not realize the second half happened. So
yes.
that was fascinating to me. Like I remember 250, but then I didn't know that they only did the 1 year. That feels sneaky.
Apparently there was a lot of confusion about that. And it sounds like even some council members did not realize that was what the final contract said. Because, council can vote on the max cap of the contract. And so they voted for a max of 250 over 2 years. And then apparently there was a lot of confusion about whether that actually happened. But what happened was that they agreed to a 1 year contract for half that amount. And then they put out a competitive bid process, which the city calls an RFP, a request for proposals. And they went through that process this year for the other $125,000. And so that's how Bounce got into the swing of things here. They applied for that RFP and they were awarded that money. So they just got approval last week for $125,000. And then because of that confusion with B. Marshall, City Council also brought to the table another $125,000 in federal ARPA money and said, we're going to give this to B. Marshall as well, but that's still awaiting a final vote. So it appears very much so that council has the support to do it, but he doesn't have that in hand yet. We anticipate that he will next week. Like I said, just days before his event is set to start.
Yeah. So last year, the city spent $125,000. Was that also from federal money?
Yes. This is all coming from federal American Rescue Plan Act money, the COVID relief funds.
And then this year, I guess combined now, $250,000 that the city is spending on this, that's also federal money.
Yes. Same pot of money.
So why an RFP for this then, especially since this is being paid for by COVID money? I know the city says they're trying to operationalize stuff, but it just hasn't been clear to me, at least, when, a grant is enough and when they need something like a bid, an RFP.
So an RFP process normally is a very standard process. That's the standard procurement process. And we would never be talking about it if there wasn't the confusion from the $250,000 that was supposed to go to B. Marshall last year and the confusion about him only getting half of that last year. So it's a standard process.
We use it for construction work and how we complete development projects and things like that. And It can be really, really small and super, super big, but you don't hear about it a lot for, things like this.
Right, exactly. So it's normally a really dry thing that we don't even talk about a lot, right? But when you have confusion about it and when you have event organizers who, like you said, it's not often used for an event like this. So maybe they don't understand the process. Maybe it was not clear how they were being scored on the process, right? The officials won't give us their scorecards or any information on what the bids contained until they have signed a final contract. So it's all kind of opaque. But I think that, I think that this kind of showed that maybe not everybody understands the RFP process. Maybe there's room to make it a little bit more transparent and user-friendly. Because, we're hearing a lot of confusion.
Do you think we'll see more of this in the future?
I would anticipate that now that the city has launched an RFP for this, that this is probably going to be the standard way that they select a vendor for this in the future. We've heard debate where council is kind of calling on the administration to go through the RFP process for more contracts. And it's meant to increase transparency and give everybody a fair chance. So I think that we're going to see a lot of RFPs coming through for events like this. And, like you said, for other contracts for construction work and for software that the city uses and whatnot. But I'm curious for sure to see how that plays out next year, because I think that everybody's going to want to avoid a rehash of what happened this year.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the Arts Council and the Cultural Trust. They have information sessions and workshops for folks to teach them how to do different kinds of grant applications and RFPs and things like that. With a lot more notice, a lot of things could be possible, right?
Absolutely.
Here in Pittsburgh, are we required to take the lowest bid RFP? Is that part of the process?
It depends. So for this one, they were saying, and again, we don't have the actual bid packages, but what the administration is telling us.
I can't wait until you get them, Julia.
Neither can I. But in this instance, the administration is saying that the vendor that they chose, Bounce, had the best match to what they were looking for. So they were saying that that was the strongest candidate based on their desires, including specifically a desire to have a lot of local artists. So in this instance, they had already kind of set the dollar amount. So it wasn't really that people were going for different funding amounts. It was more so what they could bring to the table. I'm sure that there were other factors in there as well. But again, we haven't seen the scorecards yet, so can't really speak as to what those are.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
So in your story, it says that they want to keep this going. They want this to, last into perpetuity. Where's the money going to come from? Because the city has been talking a lot in the last several months about all of that federal money is running out. We don't have it after this year.
We really don't know where the money's going to come from. Jake Pollock, who is the director of the Office of Management and Budget, he said last week that the city is committed to finding money for this in future years, says it'll be part of the 2025 budget proposal. The city is like in the very early stages of its 2025 budget proposal. So hypothetically, those conversations are probably happening, but we haven't heard anything yet about the exact source of that funding. It's going to have to come from somewhere else just because the ARPA money will not be available after this year. But supposedly that money exists, and we'll have to kind of see whether it's the same amounts and what the process looks like, but it's kind of too soon to say.
How does all this hit you as you are sitting in council chambers and talking to council members? Like, this is such a tight turnaround for a major city event. Like the 4th of July regatta back when we had it, like all that stuff is planned months and sometimes years in advance. And both these organizations are now planning a major city event for hundreds of thousands of people with days of notice. How are people talking about that, at least that you've observed?
I think that's part of the frustration here. I think that's probably part of why tempers are running so hot about this, because there's no time to sit down and negotiate this or look for compromise. Like, it's a really, really tight turnaround. At one point, there was some conversation at the table where city council was saying, maybe we just hold this for a week and we try to find compromise, we try to find middle ground. And the administration was like, you can't do that. If you hold this for a week, we can't get the money over to bounce in time to have the city-sponsored event. So, it is on a really narrow deadline. I will say B. Marshall's event was going to go on whether he got city money or not. So he had already been planning this.
Yeah, he seemed really committed from the beginning.
Right. He has additional funding elsewhere. He's done it in the past without city support. So certainly he was planning on doing the same thing, whether the city came through with the funding or not. Obviously, the funding helps, but he was still planning to have the event. As far as Bounce, we didn't hear any details of their plans at all until after the final vote. So obviously they had some things in the works, but they seem to be operating on a really tight schedule. I know they're still looking for vendors as of last week. So that's a really tight turnaround.
Can you imagine being like a craftsperson or an artist and you're just like, oh, okay. Are you like, you really
Right?
have to like jump straight into gear.
Yeah, you're putting people on the spot.
Totally. Well, let's talk about the where of all of this, too, because there's been a lot of back and forth around the parks and downtown. And of course, we just came out of one of the busiest weekends that Pittsburgh really has all year with Pride and Kenny Chesney and everything all kind of converging at once. How is the location stuff working out? Like, which one of them is in Point State Park?
So B. Marshall is in Point State Park, and he has been for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
But he also spreads out to other parts of the city, so he's going to be in Market Square as well, and have a little presence downtown and whatnot. So he's more spread out, if you will. And then the Bounce event, the city-sponsored event with Fantasy Zellers, we're told that is going to happen in and around the Greenwood Plan building on Smithfield Street downtown. So I think that they're going to have part of their celebration like in that building and then kind of flow out onto the streets or the sidewalk outside.
So a little bit inside, a little bit outside?
That's what it sounds like. We haven't heard a whole lot of details yet because, again, really tight turnaround. So they're probably still finalizing some of that, and we haven't heard all the details. But that's what I got the impression from the press conference last week.
Yeah. And then I guess like, in terms of the community, have you gotten to talk to anybody or, heard anyone speak to this, just what having a Juneteenth celebration, let alone in the city of Pittsburgh, means to folks?
Yeah, it's something that has been around for years. So this isn't brand new. Juneteenth has existed for a while, but I think that it is meaningful for people. And I think that it's impactful for them to see the event grow and to see the economic impact it generates, right? It attracts thousands and thousands of people, millions of dollars in economic impact. So, it's really giving back to the community in that sense.
And not just grow, but also get in specific investment from the city.
Absolutely, right. And I think that, Councilman Anthony Coghill kind of said that there's a stain on that because of the controversy around the investment. But, I'm sure that having city support for Juneteenth overall is, something that people would support. I think it's just unfortunate that there was so much controversy around that. And we did hear a lot of people, coming in for public comment and reaching out to local officials kind of upset about the way that the funding went. And that's unfortunate because, like you said, getting city support is a good thing to uplift Juneteenth, but it just kind of, it had a messy rollout. And I think that kind of marred that element for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, so what are you going to be looking for in the next, I guess a couple of weeks, because this is going to come upon us really, really fast.
Yeah, so a couple of things in the works. Fantasy Zellers already has her money for the Bounce event, so I'm anticipating that we'll get some more information soon on the vendors and the entertainers and specifics about that program. B. Marshall, obviously still going ahead with his event, but we are keeping an eye out for the funding from the city. City Council should take a preliminary vote on that this week and then a final vote the following week. There's also some talk, and it's in the early stages, about creating a fund to be able to give some city money to other events like this, to other community celebrations and event organizers that uplift different holidays or cultural celebrations or community gatherings. But we don't have a lot of details yet as to exactly what that might look like, but that might be an opportunity to try to kind of streamline the process so that it's not as messy for other event organizers looking to get city money. And then obviously next year, we're going to be keeping an eye on how this rolls out. It will definitely be a different funding stream, but we're expecting that there's going to be money for this again. So curious to see what the process there looks like, whether they go through the same RFP, whether they get the same applicants, whether we hear the same debates, or maybe they come up with a compromise or a system that is, transparent enough that everybody understands and we don't hear as much debate.
Yeah, and understands in advance, right?
Right, absolutely.
Well, Julia, thank you so much. Really appreciate it and can't wait to follow more from you in the coming weeks.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Pittsburgh. We'll put a link to Julia's great reporting in our show notes. Reminder, Council is expected to take a final vote on funding B. Marshall's event next week. That's expected to begin on June 14th. We will be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Talk to you soon. Sorry, I went on a tangent, Mallory, about RFPs, but I think we can maybe pull part of that up.
I find RFPs fascinating, but I think that's just a City Hall reporter thing.